Hello and welcome to the Kamla Show. We bring you interviews and conversations with technologists, entrepreneurs, filmmakers, and other news from in and around the San Francisco Bay Area. My guest today is filmmaker Whit Stillman, who was born in Washington, D.C. and studied at Harvard and then went off to Europe. He did the continental journey like good old days and directed a few films. And his latest is Love and Friendship, which is based on a novel by Jane Austen called Lady Susan. Welcome to San Francisco.
Thank you very much.
So, Lady Susan, when did you discover this novel that was published after Jane Austen's death?
I think it was around the year 2000. I had not liked the first Jane Austen I read when I was 18, Northanger Abbey. And much later, after loving everything else by Jane Austen, I decided to give it another chance. And the Penguin Classics had added Lady Susan to that edition. And so I discovered it and absolutely loved it. It's very funny. And I thought that the funny side of Austen had been too neglected.
And this is a very unusual movie because there's no moral compass in Lady Susan at all.
No, there is no moral compass, but she is a catalyst. She makes things happen, and things turn out rather well in the course of the film, despite her best efforts.
The one thing that surprised me was the presence of an American in England at that time, and it turns out that this was during King George's reign. We were fighting for the War of Independence. Tell us about your own research and how you discovered, because I guess you are from the Mayflower family.
Yes, there has been this back and forth between England and America. So my family came over as Puritan emigres, getting out of town quickly before they were had their heads chopped off in the 17th century. And then the people who were on the wrong side of our War of Independence, who often were the rather fine people who had perhaps studied at Eton and Oxford, they returned to England. There's a beautiful, quite moving painting by Benjamin West, Britannia Welcomes the American Loyalists. Benjamin West was an American loyalist who continued living in England after the War of Independence. He essentially lost his nationality.
So what did you discover during your research? Did you have to enhance the role of the American in this film?
Well, I already sort of had the research, and there was already the character of Alicia Johnson, but in the Jane Austen manuscript, she hadn't been much characterized. So it would make sense in terms of chronology that as a young woman, she would have come over to Britain. And often when someone lands in a new land, they match up with an inappropriate partner. So Mr. Johnson, the very respectable Mr. Johnson, played by Stephen Fry in the film, becomes her husband.
Yeah, and as Kate Beckinsale's character, Lady Susan, says that he's, I think, too young to die?
What is it? He's too old to be governable and too young to die.
So Kate Beckinsale is somebody that you introduced to America through your film, Last Days of Disco. Was she in your mind when you've been writing this script for years, the Jane Austen script for years? And in my research, I found out that two people recommended Kate Beckinsale as Lady Susan.
Yes.
How did you then hone in and say, okay, she's the one that I need to get?
It's an odd thing in the film business that the obvious thing before your eyes can be the last thing that you come to. So when I was writing it, I was thinking, this is ideal for Kate. And it really made me think better of collaborators when they sort of volunteered the same thing without any prompting from me. So both the casting director, Colin Jones, and the sales agent, Mike Goodrich, two London men, both thought that she'd be great for it. It's interesting that I think it was the men involved in the project who knew that Kate would be the right one. And, it's a complicated business with agencies, and there's certain agencies that aren't very friendly to independent filmmakers. And then finally, just at the right time, the stars aligned and we were able to get Kate for the film, which was great for us.
I guess the stars started aligning when Stephen Fry said yes.
That was really magical for us. It really raised our spirits enormously.
Did you hesitate before approaching Stephen Fry? How did he get a copy of your script?
No, it was the first person we offered the role to. I was really encouraged that there's a potential role for him in the script. And we got him the script. I think we actually share lawyers. We had the same lawyer, but I think it went through the usual casting process. And it was just very fortunate that he liked the script.
Early this morning, I tweeted saying I loved the film Love and Friendship, and Tom Bennett responded, favorited, and I congratulated him. And here is what he tweeted back. He says, "Love and Friendship was a joy from start to finish." Tell us about Tom Bennett and Sir John Martin. He provides the humor in this. Sir James Martin. He provides the humor in this film.
Yes.
Tell us. Apparently, you had to expand his role.
Yes. Well, to be fair with Kate Beckinsale, there's lots of humor in the Lady Susan Part 2, but it's a different kind of humor. So that's the Jane Austenian dialogue humor. Very witty, sharp things are said, but she doesn't break her cool. She's always very composed. Now, a different thing, very different thing, is the Sir James Martin role played by Magnificent by Tom Bennett. And I think last night at the opening of the San Francisco Film Festival, Kate talked about the read-through. And it's really painful read-through. These table reads before the shoot, you think they're going to be great, but there's a lot of tension and things aren't so good. And we had this fellow on a computer screen, a laptop screen. He was by Skype from Brighton, and he's just there for the longest time because he doesn't really have a scene until 1/3 of the way through the movie. And then it was just so funny, and it lifted the gloom from our table reading. And I realized that I had to write more material for him. And he just came once for his fittings, and we were finishing the day early. And I said, "We have Tom Bennett here on set, and we're not shooting anything with him." And I said, "We have to shoot something with him." And so I wrote something just right then for him to do. And they said things like, "Oh, but if he shoots something, we'll have to pay him." I said, "Okay, we'll pay him. How much is that? We'll pay him." I said, but Kate doesn't have time to change her clothes before the end of the shooting day." I say, "Okay, we'll put Kate behind the door. We'll have him in front of the door, and he talks to her behind the door." And so we actually have a memorable scene in the movie where he talks to Kate Beckinsale outside her room.
So he really, like you said, he lifts up the pall of gloom that descends. And Kate Beckinsale, she's sharp and witty. How much did you have to work with her in directing her? Because she has worked in theater before she came to America and, action films.
No, the thing about Kate's performances in both Last Days of Disco and in this film, she was in my other film, Last Days of Disco, is that in that case, there's an audition, and her performance was the same as the audition, which is just what I wanted. Her audition was perfect. And in this case, everything was perfect. But our preparation was not, could you say this with a smile? Or could you say that? No, our preparation was her going over the script and asking me tons of questions. So she really works hard on the script. I've never had that experience really as an actor where I was really went over everything. It's really helpful because I hadn't had a really development process on the script. I'd been on my own. And she was asking all these questions about, the logic, was something necessary, and it's very, very helpful. So I think that by the time she got to set, she was completely comfortable in our decisions on the script. So I wouldn't always agree with her about everything, but I'd hear what she was saying and review the script. And so I think that that's helpful, that when the actor gets to set, you've already been over everything intellectually as a literary project.
What kind of a director are you? Are you the kind who says action, shoot, or are you the kind who you're all talking around, milling around, discussing, and then the camera you say, okay, shoot?
Well, what we do is we don't do we don't do any really rehearsal or particular preparation. We do the table reading. If there are problems, like with certain scenes, we might go over them, just sort of reading through them, because I don't want the actors to lose their freshness. Over time, in looking at what we shoot in the editing room, I've noticed that the earlier takes tend to be much better than later takes that we're not aware of when we're on set. We think we're perfecting, the pronunciation of some line, but we lose the freshness of the first takes. So I try not to burn the actors out in rehearsals, and we just block for the camera a little bit, sort of walk through it so the cameraman knows what we're doing, and the focus puller isn't embarrassed. And then we let it rip. And there's usually, so generally because we're low budget filmmaking with people who aren't superstars that we don't already know, like if it's a superstar coming into our film like Chloe or Kate, I've already worked with them, so they don't have to audition. But everyone else, it's good to discover exactly what it is. Normally, I love what they did in the audition, and I just want them to do the part because they know the part, and they know it better than I do because I'm very distracted at that point, all kinds of production problems and tensions, and it's the actor who really is the whole development department of that character. They're thinking about that character, and they ask the questions about that character, and it's very helpful.
Chloe Sevigny is another actress you've worked with
Yes.
previously, and she's a perfect foil for Lady Susan and, helps her plot all these little schemes. What was it like working with her for the second time?
This is actually the second time in a feature film, but the third time overall, because Chloe accepted a part in the pilot I did for Amazon Studios called The Cosmopolitans. And that was very helpful, that in the process of gearing up for the production of Love and Friendship, we had this intermezzo to shoot The Cosmopolitans in Paris. And the casting for The Cosmopolitans helped the casting for Love and Friendship. So we found Emma Greenwell, who plays Catherine Vernon, a lovely English actress, through the casting process of The Cosmopolitans. And then I was with Chloe for that. So Chloe has a particular quality. Kate and Chloe work about acting completely differently. Chloe exists in the moment. She's absolute natural for cinema. I mean, I think she could do anything, but she's particularly marvelous in cinema. The camera loves her. She's got extremely sort of expressive eyes that can be either emotional or humorous. And so she's sort of the director's dream. I think as a director, my favorite performer in the world is the ocean. Because the ocean is always interesting, it's always in character, and it does its own thing, not needing any direction. And Chloe's a little bit the same way. She sort of exists sort of beautifully, and you just film her and you're getting something.
You studied history at Harvard and then worked in Doubleday, worked as a journalist. I would think that maybe you should have written for Paris Review.
That's really interesting you say that, because very late in his life, I got to know George Plimpton. And it was one of those things where everyone adored him and praised him, and I didn't really know much about him. And so I sort of resented him a little bit, this person always being praised. And he also panned one of my Godfather's books, which I didn't like too much either. And I finally got to know him for a project. I was going to do part of his life story as a director. And he was absolute marvelous guy, just a magnificent guy. And so I finally could understand what everyone else was raving about. And it was sweet and poignant to get to know someone, before they leave this world. And I really would like to do something with that material to sort of memorialize this great fellow.
So tell me, do films speak to you? Do books speak to you? Because when you were talking about Chloe, you made that connection about ocean. You used the ocean metaphor. So I was thinking that maybe you daydream a lot and maybe books speak to you and maybe characters jump out. I don't have that ability.
I don't know. I think generally it's best if you're working in one medium not to be inspired by people in your same area. So I like to focus on other things. I love biography and history, particularly biography, I think. And I like biography of people who have some sort of readable intellectual life. So there are traces of what was going on in their minds. For instance, I found that generally I love reading biographies of filmmakers who are also writers. And it's rare biography of a director I find is fulfilling as the chance to see into their souls through some other prism. And in film, I adore the cinema of the 1930s and of past epochs, because I think they had a sort of formality. They respected a sort of frame, and I guess I can't explain all the qualities I find attractive in the cinema of the quite distant past.
How do you find cinema of today?
Well, I don't find much of it. I don't watch that many things. I tend to love sort of the great, mass audience films that are acclaimed. I really admired The Martian. I really admired The Big Short.
San Andreas, the one on the earthquake?
No. No, I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that. No, The Big Short about the stock market, and then I like tiny independent films. I like tiny independent comedies. I adore them. I was quite inspired by mumblecore, I say, without really having seen that many of the films, because I was unemployed for so long. I was in a certain place in the industry where you're supposed to make films of a certain budget, and it was the mumblecore fellows who gave me the kind of courage to go back and do damsels in distress, sort of using their techniques.
My final question is, as I was reading the production notes and looking through the titles, there are so many people involved in the financing and producing of the film. It's almost like a patchwork quilt of different people. Why is that? Why did you have to go to so many people?
Well, it's a different financing mechanism, and it really, it can lead to bad films, and it can lead to really good films, I think. It's the way you have to do things in Europe. And now, if you want to do a really interesting project, it's sort of the way it has to go. So generally, they're not one-stop shop financing anymore. In addition to the patchwork quilt of European financing sources, we did have a sort of hard nucleus of private U.S. investors who are mostly sort of friends or contacts. And I'm really glad that the film's doing well, because they're going to get their money back. And it was my second experience having private investors of friends that I know. Metropolitan was the first, and in the Metropolitan case, they made tons of money on the film. And I hope my investors here are going to make a lot, because they're risking their money on something that's a total unknown. And I just think it's great in American cinema we have this opportunity to have private investors, because when I was trying to do films out of London, one of the reasons the films didn't go ahead is that they strictly have a sort of TV and government model for financing, and they don't have that many private investors to go to.
I said it was my last question, but there is one last question. Okay. Your great-great-grandfather was Charles Stillman, who founded a town in Texas. Your father worked with the President Kennedy's cabinet. So you're a Mayflower family descendant.
No, we're not.
You're not? Okay.
My mother says we were on the next year's ship that was much, much better, much chicer.
Okay, your version too.
Yes. We let them cut down the trees. We just came to burn the wood.
So my question is about money. What is your relationship with money? Because you said you were unemployed for a while, yeah. and here you got a bunch of investors to make this film. What is your relationship with money?
Well, that's interesting and that's a very good question, because I think I don't respect it at all, because I've seen what having a lot of it, the problems it causes people. So I am very happy to work for nothing for years if I like what it is and if I can survive on something else. So you have to have enough to survive, but you can live pretty darn well these days without much money.
Thank you so much for your time. I wish we had more time.
Thanks very much.
You were listening to an interview with filmmaker Whit Stillman. You can watch our interview with Kate Beckinsale, where she talks about her role in love and friendship. You can download this and other podcasts from our website, and you can go to our YouTube channel to see our TV interviews. And if you have any questions, suggestions, or feedback, please feel free to send them to us. We love hearing from you. I'm on Twitter. My handle is @Kamla. And as always, thank you for tuning in.